description in there in the manual. But what sorts of manifestations might you see in the woman who comes to you? Because she might come to you for some other reason. Okay, I don't know, my marriage is unfolding and growing up or whatever. But again, that awareness as we listen to where there might be woundedness, okay? So again, I'm just literally gonna sort of run through a list and then we'll talk about the process of healing, okay? But we need to be sensitive to what we see in the women. Also in the men. The men are silent. And it's important when you preach to talk about the impact on everybody in the system, okay? And not so much to dwell on the death of the baby, but rather the fallout in the system, okay? Because if you're talking about, the death, and you guys have heard the homilies, the death of the baby, what happens is I'm shut down now. I probably can't even stay. I'm gonna go to the bathroom and I won't come back. But when you talk about who's wounded, it's a different story. And people will come up afterwards and say, gee, thanks for that homily, and then they might tell you the story, okay? To talk about the fact that the church has a ministry for women and men, okay, everybody in the family system who's hurt. You can go online and you can pull, there's a number of things out there in terms of poetry that has been written, fathers' letters, different pieces. But the men who are very angry, who might come to you early on, she had an abortion, I tried to stop it, I couldn't protect my baby. Have them do something physical, like if the parish needs the patio broken up, they're your ideal candidate. Because for men, you need to physically get that anger out of your body, otherwise you just implode, okay? You might find the guys who after the fact, they come and share with you that their old fiance had an abortion and they didn't even know she was pregnant, and then their friend told them and they don't know where she is, and the what ifs, okay? The guys who agreed but didn't force it, but felt, well, this time in our life it seems like the best thing. When there's a baby, this is tapping them on the shoulder. What about that other child? And men will tend to do risky behaviors to confront death. They do things like re-enlisting in the military. I have a Hispanic father that I've worked with on and off for years. Called me, it was actually the second abortion, but I didn't know that. And his fiancés, each one of them, they were fiancés, went to Mexico and had abortions, all right? Devastated him. So he called me on the second one, but I didn't know it was the second one, and we talked about this, and I said to him one day, don't re-impregnate, because it's going to happen again. And there was this silence, and he said, Vicky, nobody in the world knows this now but you and me, and this was my second one. My first fiancé did the same thing. He went off to the military, he came back, got another fiancé, she had an abortion, he went back into the military, all right? I mean, dangerous military, signing up for, overseas Afghanistan. And this inability to process. These guys get involved in pornography because they're never going to touch a woman again, all right? They don't trust women. And if they don't heal that, if they go into a relationship, there's going to be no intimacy because he's always guarded. He doesn't trust that she's not going to do it again. And you will sometimes find another group of fathers, and I stumbled upon this guy. It was one I hadn't had on my list. They're the guys who almost lost a child, okay? I'm in Virginia, and I've done a talk, and I'm in my room, and the Holy Spirit says, go to the bar. And I said to the Holy Spirit, I don't go to the bar. Don't even talk to me. And well, 3 times I get the instruction, so I go to the bar, but it's a restaurant sort of bar. So I'm sitting there with a book and my journal and, seeing what's going to happen. In come 2 guys, probably in their late 40s, early 50s, in cutoffs, and they sit at the table right over there. The guy looks at me and he goes, you're a writer? I see you're journaling. I said, no, I'm not a writer. What do you do? I'm a speaker. So I can keep you at bay for a couple of questions. What do you speak about? Well, I help women and men who've had abortions to heal. Very loudly he says, oh, you're pro-life. I'm like, I am, but I do this other piece of it, okay? So he says, can we come sit with you? And I'm like, oh, there's a lot of people around. I said, sure, guys. So he comes over with the other guy and he goes, if I didn't have my job, I'd be burning down clinics. He sent me to the bar to talk to the crazy guy. Thanks. I said, my friend here, he'd be burning down clinics too. I said, what is it that you do that you're not allowed to burn down clinics? He said, I'm the police chief in town. He's the assistant. I said, oh, good plan. But he had gotten a girl pregnant. Her mother wanted her to have an abortion. He believed she had. Then years later discovered she hadn't, and he was in contact with her and his granddaughter. Adamant, angry pro-life man in front of clinics. Okay? People are there because they have stories. Okay? So I share that again because, especially as deacons and priests, you guys have a special outreach to men. They don't want to talk to a woman. They don't trust a woman at this point. And you're the one who might be able to do this. Remember, men don't do well face-to-face, especially when they're wounded, because that's threatening. So side by side. Again, fixing things. Hey, Sam, can you come over and help me? Father wants me to plant some plants. Sam will come and talk, okay? But important for us to recognize those wounds that are there, that are deep, deep, deep in his heart, okay? Now, the things we might see in women, yes?
What about the case where the couple decide for some reason to have an abortion?
What you see in there is, one, the relationship may crash and burn. There may be a divorce. Only 30% survive it, for starters. But they never talk about it. And it becomes the elephant in the living room. There was someone who was working on a men's book, and it was called The Elephant Behind the Piano in the Living Room. It's the hidden piece. And if they can forgive each other and grieve, okay, because at some point this has to happen, that marriage may well survive. But if he's, he gets angry or he's sad and she's fine, it just destructs. And it can go either way. But to help them, if they're ready and willing to talk about it, to grieve. And to literally say, I forgive you, will you forgive me? And then it can survive. But, many times we're told by the doctor to do this, or it appears to be a bad time for a baby or whatever. So the awareness that if we are doing some marriage counseling or something with them, this is an issue that has to be addressed, spoken about, and forgiven. Because it's silence. We needed that. And then, we've got our head under our bag. And as a couple, we begin to grow apart. So, now, the sorts of things that we might see in this woman, she might be the family prize, the perfect child. She might be the kid who's off the rails. She might be young, she might be old, she might be very elderly, that maybe she had this abortion again, a long time ago. Those women are out there. Doctors would do abortions in their offices for TB, for too many kids, for whatever, okay? So it could be anybody that we know. That's the bottom line. And the sorts of things that we might see in her, and again, I'm just going to read the list. You've got more information there, but she might be in denial for a long time. No, I needed that abortion. I really needed it. And then there's a trigger incident, and today I know it didn't work. It didn't set me free. She has low self-esteem. There's a lot of grief. She's truncated her identity as a mother. She may be very depressed. There's a lot of guilt. She isolates herself from her family and her friends who knew about it because they remind her of it. And the family can't figure out what's wrong with Mary. Her sister called and asked her to be the godmother, and she said, oh gosh, no, I'm busy. I can't come home. And everybody said, what the heck? We thought she'd be really pleased. But she's got to keep it all at arm's length. On the other hand, if there's another baby in the family, she might get enmeshed with that baby. She will be the best godmother, smothering it, okay, because that becomes her replacement child. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of anger, there are trauma symptoms. She has difficulty concentrating. She may have nightmares or baby dreams of a child that she can't help, a baby crying, a doll in a drawer. Men have dreams too, but men's dreams are impotence dreams, not sexual impotence, but male impotence, meaning something big is threatening something little and I can't do anything about it. And if they trust you, they'll tell you how they've had this nightmare for years of this shark that's attacking this whatever. It might be a puppy, it might not be a child, but something small and vulnerable. And they wake up in this absolute sheer panic because they couldn't do anything. And that's a male dream that follows that. Auditory hallucinations of a baby crying. Now this feels really crazy. Why would I hear a baby crying? Because you have those cells in your body, all right? Even those of you who do, bereavement work, you know that when someone dies, sometimes you think you hear their voice in that process of beginning to accept that reality. But I think it's twofold. I think it's I got the cells, and it's this grief piece, all right? She may have flashbacks to the abortion experience, can be triggered by an elevator, if she rode an elevator there, going by the building might set her off. She has sleep disorders, there's a lot of suicidal ideation, there's alcohol and drug abuse, very common, and it seems to exacerbate in the next pregnancy, because I'm trying to keep the memory down. There's a lot of relationship problems, intimacy problems, she might have physical pain, she might be psychically numb. These women look fine. I'm fine. Is your life okay? Oh, yeah. Okay. Flat acting. Okay. No up, no down, no nothing. Just, it's like looking at a cardboard cutout of someone. She might be hyper alert. Anything to do with babies, pregnancy, abortion, sends her to a state of alarm. You might see her, there's going to be a baptism in church on Sunday. You see this woman who just gets up and runs out of church. It might be too much for her. Okay. Difficulties in subsequent pregnancies. Again, those losses that you might be called in to be part of, whether it's a miscarriage or stillbirth. She doesn't bond well with her subsequent children. She usually has very difficult labors and deliveries. She might have an acute reaction where she gets into some bizarre situations. So there was a woman I had talked to one time and told me that she came home, she had a later term abortion. She came home, she knew how much her baby weighed, she weighed everything in her house. She rocked her rolling pin for 3 days, put it away, and then for years she was quote-unquote fine. Okay. We've had the other ones of women who kidnap women who are pregnant and perform crude C-sections and take babies. All right. We have women who killed their other children. That woman who drowned her children, this was some years ago, she was post-abortive. Okay. That's unusual, but you know, on any continuum, there are people who are out on the edge, and you never know. That's the piece. You know, this one in New York, the woman who threw the baby out the window this week. I'm betting she's a post-abortive woman because that first baby died too. Supposedly SIDS, but I'm not so sure. There have been a few of these. There was one in Milwaukee too, of a woman literally coerced a pregnant woman into her basement, murdered her, took the baby and said it was hers. And she had been telling her boyfriend she was going to have a baby, but there was a previous loss. Okay. And those are rare, but still. The other ones that you run into are the murder-suicides, and nobody knows the story, but some of those are abortion-related. There was one in Milwaukee one year, it was January 22nd, I was talking in our parish, and the story front page in the paper was about a murder-suicide, and the family knew there had been an abortion. And the male partner just couldn't hack it. He just raged, killed her, and killed himself. So question mark. Those murder-suicides, usually nobody knows. You know, what's the background, well, they're alienated from their families and that sort of thing. But just to be conscious that there might be that sort of brokenness there. She may avoid pregnancy issues completely. On the other hand, she might be attracted to babies. So she might be a neonatal intensive care nurse. She might be a daycare provider. I'm going to do well by some other baby. Okay, it's atonement work. She may have eating disorders. Now, those might actually be triggered before the abortion. They're present, but this sets it off because she quits eating. All right. Self-mutilation. Now, if she's self-mutilating in terms of cutting or burning herself, that's related to something else, but the abortion triggers it sometimes. Also know that a hysterectomy at this point, or having your tubes tied, is a form of self-mutilation. It's self-punishment. I'm never going to go there again. I mean, I refuse. I'll have my tubes tied so I don't have to be pregnant again. She might become quite sexually promiscuous right after the abortion in an attempt to get pregnant again. This isn't a conscious thing. Her body is driving her in this direction. Or later on, she might be sexually dysfunctional. She doesn't trust men at all, and so intimacy becomes impossible. She's likely to have an atonement pregnancy, so she gets pregnant again with a promiscuous behavior. She may or may not carry. Okay. Phantom pregnancy. This is rare, but it does happen. And she has the symptoms of pregnancy. Her period quits. She's got a potty tummy, but there's no biological pregnancy present. It's a psychological state. It's rare, but it does happen. Atonement marriage. She married the guy because they promised each other they lived happily ever after. Now again, in marriage prep, this is something to poke around with a little bit. They may have marital difficulties. They might be involved in abusive relationships. Sometimes women find abusive men after an abortion to self-punish. Sometimes she's the abuser. All right? I'll never forget this. A man shared his story, and he had called the cops and said there was a domestic situation. The police arrived, and he said, "Put me in the squad get me out of here because she was beating the crap out of me. And there was an abortion, and she was the abuser. So she would physically and verbally abuse him, but this time it had gotten out of hand physically. She may overcompensate in the form of her career. I have to be the best doctor, lawyer, whatever, because I gave up my baby for this. There's a spiritual one. The other thing about overcompensating is in a career, so I keep myself really, 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 really busy. I don't have time to think about it, okay? It's a spiritual wound. For many women, this is her first awareness of really serious sin. And that question of, could God forgive me? I'm afraid of God. I'm going to stay away from him. Or I might come to confession, but my heart's sealed. Okay, that's why that prayer I suggested is helpful. Other pregnancy loss issues we talked about, child abuse. Sometimes she overreacts to the child she has because the one that she lost is perfect. Stop crying! I can't stand it! And you'll see these stories of these mothers who just like explode. Well, there's this memory here. And this child isn't perfect. So I got the regular one, and I have only 3 women. It's one of the statistics, it's probably accurate. For every woman, there's a man, and we don't count them, but we should, because they're a mess. And then we've got the grandparents, the parents who said you should have an abortion or find out later, and are devastated. We've got the siblings of the children who are lost, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of science just as part of my talk here. We've got the friends who tried to talk their friend out of an abortion, but maybe went to the clinic because they were worried about her, and they suffer, okay? Many of the people that we encounter who are so angry about this all have a story. And this is not a moral and philosophical debate, it's a heart debate. People have been touched. My mother had an abortion, I've never made sense out of it, and I can't say it's not good for women, all right? Those are the people you sometimes encounter. Then you encounter the really angry people, men or women, and they've got abortion stories. They don't tell you that, but I'm defending myself. If it was good for these other people, it must be good for me, and because it was good for me, it has to be good for these other people, and so I will be adamant in my support of abortion. But what we have to know is that at some point in someone's life, it may come up. It's one of those things that sneaks in the back door sometimes, all right? Maybe I never have another child, and I'm fine until my friends are grandparents. And that abortion is in my face at that moment. Maybe I'm left infertile, and for me that's a struggle. I wanted children. It's in my face. I have a baby, and that baby reminds me of the child I don't have, and it will interfere with how I parent, both as a man and as a woman, all right? All these different pieces and places. The numbers are spectacularly high. And I want to disabuse you of one thing, and that is that abortion started with Roe v. Wade. No, it didn't. It's been around forever. How do I know that? Well, because the Hippocratic Oath, which was those guys a long time ago, forbade abortion. Did they think we were going to have a problem? Did they think we were going to exist? I don't think so. It was a problem. We have known how to abort children for a very long time. And as you guys do your ministry, wherever it is, know that some of those very old women have abortion losses that have never been resolved. Because we tend to think of, well, it would only be since 1970. No, that's not accurate at all. When I first started doing this work, there was a woman in the diocese who offered to help me when I started my national office. Everybody knew her, everybody loved her. And the first time I gave her some work to do, when I went back to pick it up, she told me about the abortion she had in World War II, done by her family doctor. This was not the backstreet sort of, worst case scenario. And nobody knew. Her sister didn't know. Her children didn't know. She had gone to confession, and the priest was very helpful to her. And then she found another woman who'd had an abortion, and together they kind of talked about stuff. But then, about 5 years ago, I get a call from her at Christmas time. Vicky, this is so-and-so. Hi, so-and-so, how are you? I'm old, I'm going to die one of these days, I'm 94. Okay, yeah, okay. What's up? And she goes, I need one of your priests. I said, do you? Yeah, she said, I need a house call. I said, okay, I can arrange that. What's up? She said, I got questions that I have to have answered before I die, and I can't ask my kids to take me to the hospital, or to the hospital, spiritual hospital. Can't ask them to take me to confession, because they they'd say to me, "Mom, what could you possibly do at 94 that requires you to go to confession?" And so, I said to her, "Priest," okay? But that, the shame, the fear of being found out, all of those things are consistent, all right? Now, the other thing I want to say to you is that the myth is that the aftermath of abortion is caused by the Catholic Church and the pro-life movement. Wrong. In Japan, since the 1950s, which I discovered a long time after I started the ministry, there have been mourning ceremonies in the temples because they believe that if there's an abortion, the spirit of the child cannot be reincarnated. These are not Christians, all right? And they say that the spirit of the child turns ugly and creates mischief. And the mischief in the family is the same symptomology that we see. In Taiwan, again, not a Catholic Christian country, they have the same belief about this ability to be reincarnated, but that there seems to be a slight difference, and nobody has been able to confirm it for me, but based on what I've read. It seems that in Taiwan, if you appease the spirit enough, it may be able to continue its journey. So they burn money, they burn clothing, they burn to equip the soul to be able to move, all right? Okay, what's that about? If it's our fault, how come they got a problem, okay? It's a universal phenomenon. And this is a woman who has lost her child in a traumatic and unnatural fashion. I do not talk about post-abortion syndrome. And as people doing ministry, you shouldn't either. Why? Syndrome implies pathology. People call our office, it's been going on for years. You know that post-abortion syndrome thing? I had an abortion, but I'm not that bad. Okay? There's a continuum of woundedness from only bothered, not bothered at all, at least I would tell you I wasn't bothered at all, to a real severe psychiatric issue. But that question of syndrome implies a psychiatric issue. What this is traumatic grief. And we need to be there to help this woman or this man to process that woundedness. We have to know that in terms of the church, John Paul II talked about it, said that if a woman comes with her repentant heart, the Father of mercies is waiting for her. Nothing's definitively lost. And that with these people will become, this is my paraphrase, the cornerstone of the culture of life. All right? Pope Paul VI talked about it, or excuse me, Benedict talked about it in a conference called Oil on the Wounds in Rome. There was a whole conference on the aftermath of abortion in Rome. Did you know that? No, we didn't hear about it. But he reiterated what John Paul II said about forgiveness, about the stress, about the fear. Very powerful. And so what Pope Francis has said now is merely a continuation. You know, the media is acting like, oh dear, he said something new. No, he didn't. It's a continuation of the two popes before. And this gift of the year of mercy. And we go, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, we have to understand that abortion has always been considered a reserved sin. In this country, once Project Rachel started, bishops gave general faculties. So we don't realize this question of the reserved sin. But in other countries, it's still a reserved sin. Okay, so if the woman came to confession, father has to go to the bishop to get permission and then come back to her. Well, what happens is she doesn't come back many times. Okay, it's a break in the system. So that awareness of the importance of being able to be forgiven is critical. Okay, and we need to be in the middle of this because you all do ministry. You have many opportunities to mention this without being condemnatory, but to mention it and give people permission to think about it. All right? Well, what do I mean? Well, marriage preparation. You guys do marriage prep. One of the things you need to say to a couple when you've got them together is, you know, there could be things from our past that might interfere with our future intimacy. Things like abuse, abortion, maybe family breakup. Okay, you never start with abortion, but by tucking it in there, you've given them permission to think about it. Now, why would you do that? Okay, because if 1 in 3 women have had an abortion and 1 in however many men, 1 in 3, they may both have had abortion losses they haven't told each other about. They may have an abortion loss that they shared, but only 30% of couples survive abortions. But if they're getting married, it's an atonement marriage. We've promised each other we're going to live happily ever after. All right? Well, if you don't resolve this, if you don't forgive each other for it, if you don't grieve for it, you're not going to live happily ever after because your intimacy don't trust each other, okay? And we live in this kind of secret place, all right? One of the places, when you do pastoral care in terms of sacramental preparation other than marriage, okay? Baptism. You know, sometimes we carry as parents old wounds that we haven't necessarily resolved, and you know, and again, mention some of the brokenness, all right? Put abortion in there. Confirmation, if you have parents, raise it. Okay, First Communion, raise it. Again, just as an, you know, an aside. But have information there that says for your friends. Put up a little sign for your friends. Business cards, booklets, whatever. Because I won't take it if you think I'm watching. You know, I think you're watching me. But if it's for my friend, I can do that. Yeah. You know, if you do work with teenagers, there's a book, and I apologize because the one I brought is the original one and it's been revised, and somebody took my revised copy. And this book called No One Told Me I Could Cry is really designed for teens, those young women who've had abortions. But turns out that older women who've had abortions who are just putting their toe in the water find this to be very helpful. So the new book takes that into account, all right? It's written by a nurse and the title comes from, she had been doing work with some teenagers that had had miscarriages, and there was a little grief group. And then about 2 days later, one of the real hard-edged kids in the miscarriage group comes in and slams the door in her office and says, "And I had an abortion, can I cry too?" So that's where the title comes from. I'll have these out at break so you guys can take a look at them. But to have these, you know, the confirmation class, maybe you're doing some kind of ministry on campus, again, there's just a pile there for your friends, okay? It's a means to give them a tool to start because they don't know where to start. And when they go online, there's some of everything out there, okay? And we have to understand that they can be pretty fragile and get themselves all sucked into, I'm going to look at dismembered baby pictures. That's not productive, all right? So this awareness of finding a gentle way to let them start the process is important. Now, I want to share a little science with you before I go any further here, because this is critical stuff. Mothers carry cells from every child they have ever conceived the rest of their lives. They're in their brain, they're in their heart, they're in their kidneys, they're everywhere in the body. And the phenomena is called microchimerism, or chimerism. All right? Now, this is why we needed a big board. This phenomenon is made more interesting by the fact that if I've had a miscarriage or a abortion, I carry more cells from those children than I do from my other children, my birth children. Don't know why, but it's there. These cells are present in her body by 4 weeks after conception. That's before she gets the final "you are pregnant" test to come out positive. Men perceive this by a change in scent, and men undergo hormonal changes throughout the pregnancy. We're not told that. Men in our society are told that they're sperm donors. It's her body, it's her pregnancy, you be quiet, you can't help, you know, you shouldn't say anything. And so these men, which have many different permutations of their involvement, are hurt. And the things that happen to the men, okay, are this. First, that first awareness of her pregnancy, his cortisol goes up. Now that's a stress hormone, but it's also a bonding and a protector hormone. Nature is saying, pay attention, something's going on. And then 60 to 90% of men, now, you're doing marriage prep, this is fun stuff, all right? 60 to 90% of men, if they're with their partner, experience something called couvade, French for hatching. That means they got symptoms. And 20% of these guys are really sick. And they go to the doctors. In our culture, we've never heard of this, but in primitive cultures, they know this to be true. All right? And way, way back, anthropologically speaking, they knew that this man had symptoms with his wife was pregnant. All right? 20% are really sick. And they go to the doctor and they say, "I'm really sick. I'm throwing up and I'm nauseous and backaches and toothaches, and I'm not sleeping well, and I'm anxious, and I have food cravings, and I've gained weight. So gentlemen, 6 pounds per kid, in case you want to know. And people, the doctor says, oh really? Must be a virus. It'll go away. I mean, seriously, this is what doctors say. Well, it does go away. About 6 weeks before the baby comes, he feels better. But what's interesting about these guys, that 20%, when that baby's born, he can tell the difference between hunger and tired and crabby. Other fathers have to learn that. But he's hardwired to know the difference. Okay? Then, chemistry changes significantly. His testosterone drops radically. He gets more estrogen. Now, men have a little estrogen normally, but now it goes up. And these two things together make him more protective and tender. He gets more cortisol, again, protection and bonding. He gets a distinctly, it's pretty much a male hormone, there's a little bit of it in women. It's called vasopressin. And this is present every time a male has intimate contact with a female. It bonds him to her and makes him jealous, potentially. Now, he can walk away from it, but biochemically he's changed. Right here, this is Mother Nature. Sit, stay, don't abandon. And then, our father gets prolactin. That's the nursing hormone. Did you know that? He's got it for at least 6 weeks. Makes him extra, extra nice and helpful. And with every child that follows, he gets more prolactin. It's an escalator. Who's counting? How does that happen? But what it does is it allows him to also move from this position of being a bachelor, if this is his first child, to being a father. And when his chemistry starts to go back to normal, the thing that does not go back to normal is his testosterone. It's never as high again as it was when he was a bachelor. Why? Because he went from being a hunter-aggressor to being a protector-provider. There is biochemical shifting going on here. And we don't know what happens to the man who starts this process early in the pregnancy, and then we end it. It's gone. It's just done. And I believe that there's chemistry involved in all of this, all right? But that awareness, when we can tell fathers that information, men identify with that. And they know there's more to it than simply being a sex object. We think of women as being sex objects, but we make men sex objects. And so that awareness is important, okay? Now, the other places where you run into this, okay, hospice work, you know, when you're dealing with someone who's dying, at some point to say to them, you know, sometimes there's stuff left from years ago that we've not processed. You know, maybe broken relationships, maybe a child loss of some kind, like an abortion or a miscarriage or a stillbirth, and listen. Because again, you've given her or him permission to talk to you about it. Because they can't talk to their kids, I mean, they don't want to, and the partner may not be the one that, you know, the one they marry, either male or female. And this is an opportunity to allow them to bring closure to this, okay? Now, the other places that you might encounter this, you know, if you do retreat work, you do days of reflection, same kind of thing. This is that secret burden that I carry. So if you're preaching a retreat, you know, you're part of doing a reflection to talk about there's nothing God can't forgive. God invited you here with a purpose today. And then list some of those sins and put abortion in, all right? Again, it's about giving people permission to do this because they don't know. If you work with teenagers, if you work with college students, you need to know that you need to walk a little carefully with them, but you also have to be on your toes because if I am a teenager and I've had an abortion in the last 6 months, I am 10 times more likely to attempt a suicide. If I'm an older woman, it's 6 times, all right? Now, we have to understand that the brain of our kids that we work with, from age 11 to 19 is rewiring itself. The logical part, the prefrontal cortex, is not working well. And if our kids were stressed when they were young, and I have a whole talk on stressors, but there's so many. You know, maybe I wasn't wanted in utero, maybe I had a terrible delivery, maybe my family broke up. The list is long. Moral development does not turn on when it's supposed to. And so when we assume people might be making a moral decision, they may not be capable of it. When we speak moral, they may not be able to hear us because it's like speaking Greek. And when I have been super stressed, the part of my brain that triggers immediately is the fear center. Right, flight, fright, okay? Fight. The amygdala. If I get pregnant and I'm terrified, I'm in self-preservation. That's how God built us. Self-preservation and species preservation. They don't operate together. It's one or the other. But self-preservation is, oh my God, this is so awful. I have to get out of this situation. That's not a rational decision. That's a fear-driven decision. And many times when you talk to someone who's had multiple abortions, you will see that there was the first traumatic one. She gets pregnant again in an attempt to replace the baby, but nothing changed. And as soon as she got frightened, she went for another abortion. All right? If you work in other cultures, all right, you've got to be aware that some of this will be a touch different. So if you're dealing with a Hispanic culture, which is basically pro-life, the burden, the shame is bigger there. Okay, it's very present, but it's bigger. I was just talking to somebody, I'm working with a couple of priests in Africa right now, but I was talking to somebody, a woman from Africa had shared her story, and she had had 7 abortions, but they were all self-induced with herbs. Now that's a little different, okay? I did it myself, okay? If I go to the clinic, there's at least a little distance there. Somebody else, in theory, this is what I'm playing in my head. Somebody else did it, okay? If I do it myself, it's a different issue. The pills, the abortion pills, the problem with that is that I come face to face with my child because it might be 3-4 days and I have a miscarriage abortion in the toilet. And do I flush it? What do I do with that child? I know people who have taken that child, kept it in their freezer, and didn't know what to do with it. Didn't want to bury it because they weren't going to stay there. Like it's a rental property. And that bathroom where this happened becomes adverse. College kids, the next person in may see this, right? So that the layers of trauma here are enormous, okay? We have to know that it makes itself present also in terms of when I become a mother, now I'm going to have this baby. That can be very traumatic because it brings up the abortion. And when I go to the hospital, if I'm delivering in the hospital triggers the memories of the abortion clinic. And now we have a very complicated delivery, all right? And I want to say to you that when you are ministering to anybody who's lost a child, and you better minister to them or I will find you. I'll tell you a story about why I say that so strongly. Know that many times, if I've had an abortion, I'm predisposed to miscarriages and stillbirths. And they may well happen. And you're seeing her with a stillbirth, okay? Ask the question, have there been other losses? Like again, name them, ectopic pregnancy, stillbirth, other stillbirths, miscarriage, abortion, name them. Because what you might see in someone is an incredible outpouring of grief. And sometimes it comes out through something else. The dog died, and everybody's really worried about Mrs. Smith because she is a mess. We have to know that many women replace their children with a pet. And when that pet dies, all hell breaks loose, okay? So that question, the gentle question, okay? If someone calls you, you're on call at the hospital, you're the one of the chaplains or whatever, don't underestimate what's happened in an abortion or a miscarriage or an ectopic pregnancy. That child will never be seen in this world. That child changed their life, okay? And men in particular, women obviously need your care. But there's a father here, cut him out, ask him if he wants to go get a cup of coffee, walk him out in the hallway, and ask him if he's okay. And as deacons, you guys bring a special piece to this because some of your fathers, and so you can talk about that. He will not tell you he's hurting in front of his wife. He's got to be brave, okay? But if you cut him out and ask him the question, he'll probably tell you, okay? Now, the reason I say I will find you is this. A woman in our extended family attached herself to us some years ago when her grandfather died. And we had known her when she was a little girl. Her parents got pregnant out of wedlock. Her maternal grandmother wanted her aborted, but paternal didn't. Paternal won, couple got married, had another daughter, and then nasty divorce. And these two little girls took a Greyhound bus from one end of Wisconsin to the other every weekend. And the littlest one cried from the time she left her mom until she got to her dad, and the one we got close to cried from the time she left her dad until she got to her mom. She wanted to live with her dad in a divorce, and it wasn't possible. At 16, she had an option, but she was involved now in school and other things, and so that didn't happen. And she used to sit at my table, and this is she's got a master's degree, she worked in business, tons of money, okay? She used to say, I'm so afraid of birth. I just don't know that I could ever do it. And I said to her, look, it doesn't take 9 months to deliver a baby. It takes 9 months to build a baby. But usually babies arrive within a 24-hour period. All right? And this, I think, had to do with her mother's own trauma of birth. All right? So she gets pregnant, which she doesn't tell me, but she gives me one clue, but it wasn't until later that I got the clue. And she comes to our house then. She's met a guy. They're going to get married. It's Christmas. She comes to my house. She brings me a Fontanini angel. And she tells me the story about the abortion. She'd gone to confession to one of my first Project Rachel priests who had been in our parish. I know I've known this guy for 40 years. And he asked her what her penance should be, and she said to tell us. Now, it's the only time I've been an official penance. My kids are probably I am one, but nobody's official. So she tells me, and I said, can I ask you why you had that abortion? And she said, because I didn't want my little girl to be without a daddy like I was. I was talking to a 15-year-old. And you know, this is a woman who was raised by a single mom. I mean, she could have raised that child, but what we saw was that old woman, all right? So then, and briefly as this unfolded, she stays for dinner, the kids go away. My husband had gotten her Faustinian's Diary of Divine Mercy, not knowing any of this, and he's going to give it to her, but I said, no, wait a minute, you have to tell him what you told me that was the deal. So she tells him, but that was God's answer to her, was that Diary of Mercy. But she marries this guy. They have 3 children, well, they have 2 children. I encouraged them to have these children at home with a midwife because I knew if she was in the hospital, she would be done. I mean, this would be a complicated delivery, and the baby might die for that matter. First delivery, 4 hours. Second one, about 12. Baby took a nap. They weren't sure about a 3rd child, and I said to her, I don't understand why someone like you and your husband, who are well-educated, good parents, have plenty of resources, would deny the world one of your children. I don't understand. Well, so they got pregnant, and that baby, she went into labor, everything was fine, they quit, went back into labor the next day, he was born with a cord around his neck, and he was dead. Now, the pastor, who she got to confession for at another place, is now her pastor here. Father calls him and tells Father what happened, and Father took leave of his senses that day and said, we don't baptize dead babies. By the time they get to me, I mean, they call me and tell me this, I get to Father and suggested he beat me to the hospital because there were 150 things he could have said that did not include we don't baptize dead babies. And I said, you know her story. If you're not there, she's never coming back to church again. And the husband was angry. And I don't blame him, all right? So Father got him, he acquitted himself well. But that's why I tell you, you keep going. But see, we also underestimate the loss of a miscarriage baby. You know, people say stupid things like you can have another baby. Yeah, but I'm not going to have that baby. Pastorally, we need you to know, to recognize that, to give us a blessing, to offer a little ceremony or something. If children have value, we have to celebrate all children, okay? And again, you run into those experiences, and it's important for you, again, as I said, to cut that father out, okay? Now, there's a prayer that if you've got somebody who's got a big wound, like an abortion, but it could be anything, because you guys encounter all kinds of stuff, right? That you can invite them to say. And you warn them that it's a very dangerous prayer. Now you've got their attention. And the prayer is this: God, I give you permission to heal me. Why is it dangerous? It's always answered. Yeah, so you guys are sure you really want to be healed. But, so many people, especially women with abortions, this is the unforgivable sin in their head. They'll go to confession several times, and one woman at one point wrote this very eloquent testimony about how she locked God's grace in her heart. She'd go to confession, she got this plaza in her heart, she put it in there and locked the door. And then she encountered a Project Rachel priest who the Holy Spirit had to say the right thing. And suddenly she really felt God's forgiveness. Okay? But this is true for other sins too. we hold God at arm's length, we say, oh God, heal me, please, but I don't give him permission. And if you remember the picture that many of our grandmas had on the wall of Jesus knocking on the door, there's no doorknob on his side. He can't come in unless we open the door. And you can say that to me, that's amazing. The younger generation knows that picture too, all right? But it's one of those visuals that helps them be open to the possibility that God could want to heal them, okay? And I want to show you a picture, because I think you guys need this picture. I came upon it one time when I was going to do a day of reflection. Now, it's a picture of the Good Shepherd. You see the sheep is not white or black, it's spotted. And you see where the sheep's head is? Could that sheep see Jesus in that position? No. But it sees the world as Jesus sees the world. This picture has incredible soothing powers for people who are crying out to God in pain. Where is God? I can't see God. I don't know where God is. I hurt so bad. To help them see that in their pain, God's carrying them. But when they're being carried, they're not seeing God. They're being supported. This just has, that image has really powerful imagery for people. The second thing is the whole devotion of Pope Francis to Our Lady, Undoer of the Knots, or Our Lady of Knots. That image of Mary untangling knots is a very powerful one for the wounded. And the generations that we minister to are wounded. They got wounds they can't even begin to tell you about. They just know they're a mess, all right? For parents who are praying for their kids who are a mess. There's a number of prayers online to Our Lady of the Knots, but she is, I think, a Madonna for our time. Because there are so many unknowns. There are so many, you don't even know how to pray for your kids sometimes. You don't know how to pray about the pieces of your life that are in shambles or whatever. It's a beautiful image to bring people to, okay? Now, I want to say another thing quickly. Those young women that you might encounter who just had an abortion, you have to understand that because she's carrying cells, that abortion does not end until her anticipated due date. Yeah, the physical thing happened. Her body is remembering her pregnancy. And she will tell you that she is she's kind of a mess. She just feels terrible. And so, you can talk to her about the fact that her hormones won't settle until her anticipated due date. And she feels like she's sort of in a massive state of PMS. One minute she's raging, the next minute she's weeping. But these cells are active and carrying on, all right? Then you're going to talk to her about eating. And again, this is for anybody who's in distress, all right, this eating part. It's important for us to tell her that she eat protein with some fat. I know that's a bad word. However, biochemically, here's the story. If I'm stressed, I don't eat carbs, and it makes my blood sugar go up. But then it drops. And now let's say I have Coke with sugar. And so now there's a giant one. Anybody in this room, if your blood sugar drops rapidly and low, you are suicidal, there's no questions asked. Remember what I said about the percentages of suicidality here. This suggestion helps to keep her out of this particular piece of suicidality. Because if she eats protein with a little fat in it, it evens out the swings. She's still going to be eating chips and drinking soda. But if she eats protein with a little fat, and this is true for all of us, all right? Maybe the size of the palm of your hand. A couple times a day, 3-4 times a day actually. It will even that out, and she'll feel a lot better. Many of us have blood sugar swings and we don't even realize it because we are so busy, we have so many things going on, we forget to eat, or we're eating the carbs too. But the importance of knowing that we need that protein in our system. You're going to have to tell her what protein is, because in our culture we don't know that. We're a microwave world, all right? If protein came up in bitter, she wouldn't know, but if it did bite her, it would be protein. But what do we anticipate? Well, what do we see on TV? 16-ounce steaks. She doesn't do that. But, right now, things like cold meat and cheese, be careful about nuts. I mean, they're good, but if you've got an allergy, we have to be cautious about that because you're the expert right now. We don't want her to accidentally eat peanuts and have, you know, a terrible reaction to that. But this will help her, and guys too, right? When you're talking to people who are really in a bad spot. When you are in this state, you are anxious, you are headachy, you are paranoid, you're weepy, and you're kind of trembling. And we don't always know what that's about. You know, when it goes, I'm having an anxiety attack. I just did this with a young woman who came into my life some time ago, and she's had, you know, talk about a mess. She's had 3 or 4 abortions. She's had 2 miscarriages, and she's 19. Okay, and she called one night. She said, I'm having an anxiety attack, and I said, okay, I want you to go get some protein and call me back. You know, get some orange juice, get a little immediate sugar. Felt better, but she didn't realize that. Okay. Then are they sleeping? Probably not. For all of us, if we're sleep deprived, 20-minute color naps take the edge off of sleep deprivation. If we're sleep deprived enough, we get psychotic. All right, for all of us. And set an alarm, because you don't want to fall into that next stage of really deep sleep where you wake up and you're real groggy. This is enough to restore you. And sometimes, you know, you might have a college student or somebody who's got an exam the next day or something. These are things you can sort of say, now, I want you to eat some protein. I want you to take a 20-minute nap before you go to class. And exercise is the other thing here. Now, this doesn't have to be working out. A walk will release good endorphins in your brain. Will help to decrease depression, okay? Encourage her to have a friend go with her, though, because the problem is I'm so depressed. It's not like going for a walk is more than I can handle. But if my friend is coming, okay, I can do it. But these are things that are short-term in terms of helping her. When she gets to her anticipated due date, she may have a bad period, she described it that way, extra tender breasts, back pain, more cramping. It's her body remembering. And then to suggest to her, you know, to say to her, now when you get close to due date, you might have some symptoms, right? But then maybe it's a good time for her to do something that's sort of symbolic. Maybe she lets a balloon, releases a balloon or something. Why? Because abortion is a non-event. Okay, there's no end. I went to the clinic, you know, the medical thing happened, and then there's nothing, and I don't know what to do with this. And so it's a way to mark that. Also to know that until she's on the other side of that due date, she's not really ready to undertake a process of real healing because she's not available to it. But also to recognize, as I said earlier, about how from 11 to 19 our brain is changing. For years, I used to get calls from women who were 25, not sooner, okay? And I couldn't figure out what this 25 thing was about, because the abortion might have been, you know, 2 weeks ago, and it might have been 10 years ago. The last part of the brain to come online comes online at about 25, and it's the corpus callosum, it's the left brain and the right brain connecting each other. Now I can process trauma. Before that, I can't get to it, okay? So I go through the process with you, but I haven't really done the deep healing. And we have to be careful about respecting this process so that she doesn't go into what's called pseudo-recovery. What that means is I did everything that expert told me, and now I feel like crap. Everything just fell apart. Something wrong with me. I knew I couldn't be healed. You know, she lied to me. So to talk about, you know, the need that this is a process, it's a process of grief. You're there to companion them, okay? There's Project Rachel if you want to see, you know, a therapist or whatever. But the importance of recognizing that everybody does this kind of at their own pace, okay? And not for us not to be too quick about it, right? Now, the other thing is for us to be cautious, though, is if we encounter somebody who is post-abortive, be careful until you know how old they are in their story about talking about the baby. Because these are the people who get fascinated with the dismembered baby parts online. See, in the past, we didn't have social media. We couldn't access that if we wanted to. Okay, it'd be in a medical journal somewhere, but I couldn't go to the library and find it. Now it's at my fingertips. Psychologically, that's incredibly damaging. Okay, so for us to be kind, and somebody says to you, yeah, I'm online all the time, discourage that. Okay, it's not helpful. It's very self-punishing. And you can tip somebody into a psychotic break with that, okay? So those pieces to keep in mind. The other thing to be aware of is that you might encounter those other people, and we've only got a couple minutes before a break, so let me just talk about this. You might encounter the grandma who says, my daughter had an abortion, and I drove her because she needed to have it. Yeah. But you gotta fix her, because she's a mess, all right? You might encounter the grandma who comes in and says, my other daughter just told me that my first daughter had an abortion. No words, okay? You might encounter the grandfathers, and the grandfathers who lose their children, their grandchildren to abortion can sometimes be very angry, okay? To meet them where they are is important, you know, for the grandparents maybe to arrange for maybe father to have a mass for the lost child and for the daughter that needs healing or the son. That's something we can do without it being invasive for the girl who might not be ready yet, okay? I mean, one time I got a call from a grandma and her story was, we drove her to Madison, she needed an abortion, she's a mess and I want you to fix her. I said, I don't think she's ready to be fixed or she'd be calling me. What about you? And there was this dead silence because she really hadn't thought about what happened to her, okay? So those people who are there, you know, the kids who've lost their siblings, their cousins. In our extended family, one of my daughters is surrounded by 5 aborted cousins, all right? And we figured out that she was a twin, all right? And 1 in 8 of us is a twin. We've lost our twin in utero. We spend time looking for that twin, not consciously, but we're searching, okay? And when I had figured out that my daughter was a twin, somebody had given me an article on this, and she was about 15 at the time. And I said to God, I knew, but remember, I didn't know about the cells yet, but I knew this was true. And I said to God, you got to tell her. I'm not telling her, because she's got all these aborted cousins, too. And this is my daughter who, when she was 6 years old, said to me, Mom, why don't I have any cousins my age? Everybody in this family has cousins their age, not except me. God gypped me. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know about the cousins, okay? But she knew. And so, you know, as these pieces unfold, she woke me up one night and said, Mom, I was praying and I think I'm a twin. This is about 2 months after I got the article. And I said, I think you are too. I said, is it a boy or a girl? She goes, it's a boy. His name is Joseph Francis. This explains why I'm so attached to my brother behind me and why all my best friends have been guys. I'm looking for my brother. All right? You may encounter people with that kind of, they say, I always thought I should have a brother or a sister. It might be a twin, but it could be the aborted child also. All right? One of my sister-in-laws had an abortion before she married my brother-in-law, and she was the first one in the family to tell me about her abortion. And it was a good Christian family, not Catholic. Her father had insisted she was a shame to the family, took her to the clinic, then she got blood poisoning and almost died, and on the way home from the hospital after almost dying, her father said, this will never happen again, all right? I was stunned. We went to talk about, I saw her all the time. We went to talk about it. She said, my husband said he told you, and I said, he told me what? He didn't tell me. And so I was just kind of speechless, all right? Nobody knew, and then at one point she told one of her daughters, who told one of my daughters, and this daughter in our family is known as Miss Never Had an Unspoken Thought. And she kept it to herself other than her younger sister and me. And when she heard this from her cousin, she came home and sat down like this, and she said, so, I suppose you know about Aunt so-and-so's abortion. I do. You think that's why she took in the fetal alcohol kid, why they adopted that other baby they didn't really want, but they had fostered him? She went down the line. She was 15 years old. She was right on target, all right? So, it sits. Her cousin, this woman's son, lived with us for a while. And he was sitting at the kitchen table one night, and he was musing to this daughter. They're 6 weeks apart in age. I always thought I was supposed to have a big brother. And she said to him, you do. His name is Christopher. Your mom had an abortion before she married your dad, and he wept from the depth of his soul. But he knew. He knew. He's very pro-life. But thank God there was somebody he could talk to about it. And I was doing a mass with Archbishop at that point, Dolan, and so I was having young people carry candles, you know, to represent how many lost millions of children. So he carried a candle for Christopher. But those things come up in sort of casual conversations sometimes in terms of pastoral stuff. So that awareness of who's out there. You know, the wounds my daughter carries from having lost all these cousins. You know, as an aunt, the wounds I carry. I found out about the first first aborted child was a girl who was exactly her age. His name was Maria. I asked the father to tell her about the child. He was pretty well healed. Letter arrived on her birthday. It took 3 months to get from Chicago to Milwaukee. I could have walked that sucker back and forth a number of times, but it arrived on her birthday. It was God's answer to her question. All right. She grieved for Maria. All right. Then there was someone else in the family who I thought was a father. And with men you can do this, with women you couldn't. All right. And I talked to his wife. I knew she wasn't the one who had an abortion. And I said, they were expecting their first baby. If there's anything that he hasn't finished grieving yet, invite him to do so before the baby comes. And she said, don't tell him I told you. And then we had a whole conversation without saying the word, okay, that I was right, all right? So he comes, and I take him for a walk, and I say to him, I have reason to believe you're an aborted father. If you're not, ignore me, and men will. There's no problem. But if you want to listen to me, and I need to encourage you to finish grieving before this baby comes, because it's going to mess with your fatherhood. Now, I'd done my duty. I was off the hook until he told me who the mother was. And I thought that this was a woman he was first loved. No, it was the woman who was in my house the day I brought my daughter home from the hospital, and she was pregnant. Did my daughter recognize her cousin in utero like John and Jesus did? Question mark. I wondered. I mean, I really wondered. When I heard that, I was just like, I was blown out of the water. And it took me a while to grieve that one. I was really angry. Now there's 2 of them. And I couldn't even process this. And one day I'm driving across the bridge. I've got a conference coming up. I'm going to ask the Holy Innocents to pray for their parents. And I had an image of this young man. And it wasn't, it's like you think about your mom, your wife, your sister, that kind of image. But I knew who he was because he looked like both his parents. And his name was Mark. And I had to apologize to him because I couldn't begin to grieve until that point. Okay? We carry those wounds with us, and we need to be conscious of that. Now, let's field some questions if you have some so far. No, they're all spelled off, Father.
You threw out just a few physiological realities there. Is there a concise source that unfolds some of those things regarding pregnancy, both for female and for men, and those sorts of things? Are there,
One source? No.
Would you put that?
Right here.
Okay.
Because I've done tons of reading on this stuff, okay? In terms of the cells that I talked about, there's a good article in Scientific American called The You and Me, all right? So that would be something you could lay your hands on. If you put in men, hormones, pregnancy, you'll get, USA Today had an article and some other ones. The microchimerism for the mothers would be in that first article as well. But pick some of those key words. There are people who have written articles that are usable, okay, that for you or for someone else. Footnote, this is a footnote. When women are on the pill, they are attracted to the wrong biological mate. They are attracted to a male who is too much like them, as opposed to being a complement to them. This is for marriage prep, you need to know this. If she goes off the pill, she is not going to find him attractive anymore. He has a problem because her ovulation is suppressed, and he's not going to be in the biological dates with her. That sweet young thing at the office who's not contracepting, once a month, his heart's going pitter-patter, could be an affair, all right? There's an article from the Wall Street Journal called The Tricky Chemistry of Attraction, which would be good to have in your file, just to share with couples. Because if we can keep people from heartbreak, all the better. There was another article from The Guardian in England. First one I saw that was called a sniff test. And it was, if you were living with somebody, in fact, you might want to have kids, what you should do is you should go off the pill, but we don't know for how long because it takes a while. And secondly, he should then, after you think you're chemically restored, he would wear the same t-shirt for 3 days. No scented anything. You would smell it, and if it smelled good, he's a good potential mate. If not, he's the wrong guy. All right? But this is a tribunal issue, because our kids are put on the pill at 14, 15, 16, have no idea, parents don't know either, and so they make these wrong choices, and then this marriage crashes and burns. Okay? If we can prevent that by raising this piece, all the better. Okay? Questions? Any other ones? Yes. Whoops. First two. Go ahead.
What about embryo reduction?
It's abortion. I mean, that's the problem. And the child that's in utero that remains has cells from that too. They pass carrying biological knowledge of who shared a womb space with them, whether it's a vanishing twin or whether it's embryo reduction. Okay, and that's a big deal. And what's going on in terms of reproductive technology is that we're going to have a lot of people with this issue of who is supposed to be in there with me. You know, we implant 3 or 4 with IVF or whatever, and they either we reduce them or they die. Well, I was sharing womb space, okay? We have knowledge of who's there with us. There's a great piece that National Geographic did some years ago on twins in utero. And I had used it, our sons had gone to an all-boys boarding school, Catholic, run by the Capuchins, and the director had me come up because the guys were getting kind of, you know, abortion wasn't really that big a deal. So I decided, these are guys, I gotta have visuals, all right? So I found this DVD and I just used sections of it. But you see that these children in utero are interacting. They're hugging each other, they're cuddling. And the one I left them with, because this is a great teenage boy, you know, visual, there's this baby sleeping and there's this little foot going, kicking him in the head. The boys who are now in their 30s still remember that picture, all right? But we have to recognize that what happens in utero is it's one of those very sacred places, and that the chemistry that's going on there is enormously complex. So all of those pieces, and for the mother, she's got knowledge. If this baby was in there for at least 4 weeks, the cells from all those kids are in her body, okay? Surrogacy is another issue, because I'm carrying an ovum from a woman who isn't me, because I can't use my own ovum in most states. And so biologically, I'm going to have an autoimmune reaction. Baby is conceived in a petri dish. In the human body, the ovum picks out of all those sperm, it goes that one. And then there's an attraction. And there's all this chemistry that happens. And sperm is incapable of entering an ovum unless it's changed in the woman's body. It has to undergo capacitation, it's called. Now it's possible for the sperm to enter the egg. Well, the sperm in the dish that the doctor has, he has to pick the sperm. Then he injects it. In the human body, the sperm makes its way in, and then the egg seals itself up. We're going to see issues from that, I'm telling you that. But now I'm carrying a child I'm not related to from a man I haven't had sex with. That sets off autoimmune issues in me also. And this child is now going to carry cells from me as the carrier, but I'm not the biological mother. Okay? If it's a female, now we've got intergenerational change going on. Because it's going to, that child will pass my cells to the next, to the next, to the next. Serious issue.
Most of the time, aborted women will complain that, or say that the confession wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Now, your friend said, well, you worked out with the young woman, well, what can you do? And she said, well, tell you.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult to ask them, work with them to find out, figure out what it is that they can do to begin to heal.
Yeah. You know, when they come to you in confession, I'm going to talk about the pieces that need to be addressed, okay, and it won't come back. But that willingness to be open to examining all the wounds, there's anger there, there's relationship issues, there's the need to grieve for her baby, there's a need for her to have her relationship with God restored, and to forgive herself. And so, you know, by way of quick history, Project Rachel came about because I had a friend in high school who had an abortion arranged by her mom before it was legal. She already had a baby, which I didn't know. She always said to me, I can live with the adoption, I can't live with the abortion. Those words are etched in my heart to this day. I knew it wasn't good for her, all right? But when I went to work for the diocese, and it was a job that chased me, the bishops, in their first pastoral plan, 1975, had called for a ministry of post-abortion healing. Why? Because they were confessors, exactly what you said, and they knew it was a big deal, but they didn't know what to do about it. And so that was really the thing as I was carrying out the pastoral plan. There were different parts to it that spoke to me that as church we had everything we needed to be able to companion her. And whether it's with the priest, whether it's with the spiritual director later on, a mental health person, because I never resolved whatever, we see it as a holistic response. And we have all the resources she needs to be able to do this. And it's not a one-time, I'm just going to go to confession, because that's kind of the